So after renouncing the extreme ascetic path, the Buddha to be goes to find a nice place to sit. He encounters a young woman named Sujata who gives him gives him a free lunch. And I saw a lecture by Bob Thurman once where he said free lunch is the foundation of Buddhism, and I was like, sign me up. No, anyway, so he has a healthful meal. He receives a grass mat, and then he sits. And in this state of meditative absorption, the middle path, he begins to understand things about the nature of reality. Along the way, he is attacked by the god Mara. Now, again, the way that the teachings and life of Buddha are presented are often based on a Christian Protestant template, which means that many people present Mara as if he is the devil. But within the Buddhist tradition, there's not only is there no devil, but there's also no God. No God with a capital G, no devil with a capital D. Mara is actually one of the gods, so God with a little g, taking care of the world of death and rebirth. Okay, our world is sometimes referred to as samsara. It's this cycle of death and rebirth. Beings are born into a higher state or fall to a lower state depending on their past karma. There are lots of heavens, there are lots of hells in traditional cosmology. So if you think of samsara, this wheel of death and rebirth, think of that as an engine. Our karma, our action, is what keeps us, what keeps the engine going. Mara, you might think of as like a technician who keeps this engine in good working order. Mara is worried because if this ascetic, Prince Siddhartha, if he can escape samsara, if he can understand the true nature of death and rebirth and suffering, if he can escape this problem, then he can teach other people too. And if Siddhartha can teach other people how to be liberated, then he'll be out of a job. So he doesn't want the prince to succeed. So Mara attacks, Mara sends armies. He sends his sons and daughters to distract the prince, to frighten him, but the Buddha is unmoved. And here is one of the great moments that we see in Buddhism, the Buddha touching the earth. Finally, Mara's kind of last-ditch effort is, just who do you think you are to occupy this spot and claim to achieve awakening? The Buddha touches the earth, and the earth goddess herself is like, you may occupy this spot, and roars, and Mara runs away. It's one of the coolest moments. I think it's really interesting how often the gods appear in the traditional narratives of the Buddha, right? When the Buddha is born, the gods rain down sweet ambrosia. And that's why we do the bathing of the baby Buddha for babies for Buddha's birthday celebration. The four sights are said to have been orchestrated by the gods because the gods also want to achieve liberation. It's one of the other interesting things about Buddhism. And so there's no God with a capital G, but there are a lot of little gods, right? It's interesting, like as Buddhism spread throughout Asia, it brought all the gods with them. So you can go to a Buddhist temple in Japan and the main image might be, I don't know, the Hindu god Ganesha. So Buddhists like lots of gods, right? But it's understood that the gods are beings like us who are stuck in this realm of death and rebirth in need of, the Dharma, the teachings, right? So the gods are there to help out along the way, right? So the Buddha is thus victorious, conquers Mara. Now, nowadays, people really like to psychologize Buddhism, or perhaps another way to put it is Buddhists have found it to be really helpful to describe Buddhism in terms of psychology. Okay, some might even say that psychology is the new religion of the modern West. Okay, sure. When Buddhism spread into China, Buddhists employed Taoist terminology to explain Indian Buddhist concepts, right? So nowadays, as Buddhism's been spreading into the, flowing into the, let's say, North America, Europe, and Africa, and everywhere else. So people are using the resources available to them, in these target cultures. So in some cases, Mara is understood to be the dark side, that maybe the shadow self or whatever of the human mind. But in other contexts, he's understood to be this god. Yeah. In any case, so the Buddha is sitting under this tree, which comes to be known as the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening. At the first watch of the night, he becomes aware of his own past lives. In this life I was born as this, in this life I was born as this. He comes to see this chain of causation that has led to him being who he is. At the second watch of the night, he becomes aware of all of his past becomes aware of all the past lives of other beings. This kind of interconnected web of life he becomes aware of. At the third watch of the night, he becomes aware that all things arise dependent upon causes and conditions. This is a really important idea, and some traditions would even argue that this is the content of the Buddha's awakening, is to see how all things are interconnected. So, the Buddha teaches for a long period of time, and then at the age of 80, by the age of 80, he had established a large community and began teaching, and had been teaching people how to awaken to this reality that he had discovered. But nothing is written down for a long time. So Buddhism is extremely diverse. It lasts for a long time, but it's not for a few hundred years until anything is written down. So what we know about the life of the Buddha and the development of early Buddhism comes down to us, through various traditions. Okay, so let us continue. Let's talk about some of the basic teachings of the Buddha. So what did the Buddha teach that went on to inspire all of these diverse Buddhist traditions? So let's go back to that third watch of the night. In Sanskrit, we refer to as pratitya samutpada, or dependent origination, sometimes called dependent co-arising or something like that. And this is, maybe described as saying that everything arises dependent upon causes and conditions. No thing is permanent, no thing exists independently, and no thing is self-created. So everything that you can conceive of in here or out here is dependent upon other things. And those things are dependent upon other things. And all of these things are constantly changing, okay? So let's continue with that, right? One of the other things that the Buddha discovers in this moment of awakening is, the nature of the human condition, the fundamental problems that afflict our existence. Now, the so-called Four Noble Truths are perhaps more accurately described as the Four Truths for the spiritually ennobled, the Adiya Satya. And the first one, I think, is often misunderstood. The first one is the truth of dukkha. Many people say that the first noble truth is life is suffering, right? How would that, I always wonder, how would that inspire, what some people regard as the first world religion? Life is a bummer, right? So, and many of the early interpreters of Buddhism, the Christian missionaries that came to Asia, would describe Buddhism as being very pessimistic. And I think that that's where this idea comes from, that life is suffering. Now, you had nihilistic philosophers in Europe who were like, yeah, we like the Buddha. He says life is suffering. But maybe there's a more subtle point being made here, I think. All right. Our problem is dukkha. Some contemporary Buddhist teachers have begun to translate dukkha as stress. Now, stress can be both good and bad, right? If you happen to land your dream job, that's great, it's exciting, but it's also a little bit stressful. I know from experience. I happen to have my dream job, and at the beginning it was very stressful. There was a lot of stuff going on, right? There are traditionally 8 kinds of dukkha. Okay, birth, old age, sickness, and death are 4 kinds of dukkha. The other 4 kinds are to not get what you want, to get what you don't want, to not be with those you love, and to be with those that you don't particularly care for, right? All of these 8, that's life. Like these are the things that we experience. It's the thing that everyone experiences. The Buddha was describing these things 2,500 years ago. You can describe it today, and it still resonates, right? So this is one fundamental part of the human problem is dukkha, right? We are stressed out. Our problem, however, has a cause. That's helpful. Right? The problem has a cause, and the cause is our ignorant clinging. We are stressed out because we seek ultimate satisfaction in things that will not ultimately satisfy us. Thankfully, the problem has a solution, and this is what the Buddha realized and attained under the Bodhi tree, nirvana. The word nirvana means something like to blow out, to extinguish. Our ignorant clinging is sometimes described as burning, grasping fuel, okay? So the nirvana would be to blow that out, right? The problem, dukkha, has a solution. It is possible to uproot the cause of our ignorant clinging to ephemeral things. I seek satisfaction in things that will not satisfy me. If I can learn how to not do that, if I can learn how to engage with the world differently, I can let go, right? And when we do that, we achieve liberation or freedom, bliss, peace. Even, some people might even use the word salvation. All of these are words that can be used to describe nirvana. Now, if we stopped there, that would still be a little tricky, because who knows? Can anyone besides the Buddha even do this? But number 4 says that the solution is achievable. Now, some people have compared this to ancient Indian medicine. There's a disease, the disease has a cause, the disease has a cure, and here's how to administer the cure. Maybe that's a useful way of thinking about it. Right? This is the path that kind of breaks down how to achieve this. And this is often depicted as an 8-spoke wheel. Right view is to see the world as it is, to see things not as unchanging and fixed, including the self, but rather to understand that things are composite, made of other things, always changing, right? Change is a constant, and lacking in any fixed qualities. Everything is actually much more dynamic and fluid, right? We have right resolve, so right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right meditation. Perhaps in a later lecture we can break each of these down into more detail. But I don't want to run out of time. So these 8 can be broken down further into those that correspond to wisdom, those that correspond to morality, and those that correspond to meditation. So these 3 are integral to the Buddhist path. So let us continue. All right. So let's talk a little more about what nirvana is exactly. Nirvana is sometimes not described, or it's said that any way that we could describe nirvana is so rooted in our ordinary way of thinking that it doesn't quite measure up, right? So like I said, the word nirvana is to blow out that burning, grasping fuel. I want, me, mine, stop, right? Nirvana is both beyond being and non-being, beyond existence and non-existence, beyond dualistic human conception of me and mine. Nirvana is sometimes described as the unconditioned, the unborn, the deathless, that which is beyond suffering, perfect bliss, peace, liberation, salvation, and so on. Nirvana is the moon, and then Buddhism is the finger that points at the moon. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the Sangha. Let's talk about what Buddhists do with these ideas. Yeah. So one of the basic practices that a Buddhist might do is taking refuge in the 3 jewels. Here I have a picture of an artist rendering of the first Buddhists. Okay, so according to tradition, the Buddha has achieved awakening. He's sitting under a tree, and some merchants are driving by, and they see this meditator in the woods, and they're thinking to themselves, we're about to go on this long journey. It could be dangerous. Let's make an offering to this sage, right? So they make an offering, and they take refuge in the Buddha, and they take refuge in the Dharma. Nowadays, you would take refuge in the Sangha, but there was no Sangha yet. Okay, so the Buddha obviously is the great teacher. The Dharma is the great teaching. The Sangha is the community of monks and nuns, or by some definitions, all the Buddhist community, and by some definitions, all beings. Okay, so at this point, there wasn't the Sangha, there weren't monks and nuns yet, so they took refuge in the 2 jewels, right? But once Buddha started teaching people, then a Sangha, a community formed around the Buddha, We have monks and nuns, laymen and lay women. So called the fourfold Sangha. So today, one of the common Buddhist rituals, if you become a Buddhist, this is one of the things you might do, is recite, I go for refuge to the Buddha, I go for refuge to the Dharma, I go for refuge to the Sangha. In the Pali language, the language we associate with the Theravada tradition, the Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Sangham Saranam Gacchami, Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Sangham Saranam Gacchami. Say that 3 times and poof, you're a Buddhist now, right? No. So during refuge ceremonies, during Buddhist ceremonies, this is something that you might encounter. I have here at the top says shared tradition. So these are some things that you might see in the Mahayana world or Theravada world together. Another thing is the 5 precepts. Do not kill, do not steal, do not engage in sexual misconduct. For monks and nuns, that means no sexual activity at all. For lay people, that means, no illicit sexual activity or, cheating on a significant other or something like that. Do not lie, do not imbibe intoxicants. Now, I've seen some Buddhists that interpret number 5 a little differently. For some Buddhists, it's don't drink or do any drugs or anything like that. For other Buddhists that I've met, let's say hanging out in Japan, some people interpret it as, don't get like drunk, right? So, again, Buddhism is diverse. Different people interpret different things in different ways. Yeah. All right. Now, here's another aspect of the Buddhist world, is what we call the three vehicles. Right. So this is something that actually is common to Mahayana Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism as well. It's understood that the early Buddhist community had recognized 3 spiritual vocations. The first one is the Shravakayana. Shravakayana is, this means the vehicle of the listener. That would be beings who achieve awakening as an arhat through Buddhist practice and the teachings of the Buddha. So these are people who, study the teachings and practices of the Buddha and then achieve awakening as an arhat. An arhat is someone who is spiritually ennobled and, like the Buddha, achieves freedom from dukkha, freedom from samsara through the practice of the Buddhist tradition. Okay. Then we have the Pratyeka Buddhas. And I think this is a really interesting category. Pratyeka Buddhas means the vehicle of the solitary Buddha. So this would be someone who figures it out on their own. So, I often wonder, is this a hypothetical category that Buddhism came up with to account for, what if somebody figured it out on their own? What if someone outside the Buddhist tradition, off on their own, they don't teach, they're not part of the community, but they figure it out, just like the Buddha did, right? But the difference between the Pratyeka Buddha and the Buddha we've been talking about is that he taught other people. Pratyeka Buddha doesn't. They just go off on their own, they achieve nirvana, and then they, become one with the force when they die or something like that, right? Then we have the Bodhisattva Yana. So this would be a being who strives to become a Buddha, strives to become one of those special beings who achieves awakening and who achieves awakening at a time when Buddhism doesn't exist, who achieves awakening at a time and reveals the Dharma anew. Okay. The tradition we now call Theravada draws upon the Shravaka tradition. The tradition we now call Mahayana strongly emphasizes the Bodhisattva Yana, but all 3 of these go back to the early Buddhist community. Okay, let us continue. Let's talk about some of the things that Buddhists do. I've spent a lot of time talking about ideas and doctrine and things like that. Perhaps that's in part, that's how people tend to present Buddhism. Is once upon a time there was a founder, and here are his teachings. Well, it's a very Protestant model for thinking about Buddhism. It's how we do these things in English, I suppose. But Buddhism in practice, though, is often a lot less focused on doctrine and belief, and much more focused on practice and community. So let's talk about some of the things that Buddhists might do as they draw upon the power and inspiration of the Buddha. Typically, there's a division between what monks do and what lay people do. But there are some traditions, like, for example, Jodo Shinshu in Japan, that doesn't have a strong emphasis on the role of the monk and is largely a lay-based Buddhist tradition. But in general, there are things that monks do and there are things that lay people do. So one of the things that monks do is they follow the Vinaya. Vinaya are the monastic rules that govern, the types of robes that monks might wear, the clothes they eat, their behavior, and so on. Some monks may engage in meditation. Some monks may specialize in certain forms of meditation. Nowadays, meditation is becoming very popular for lay people, but traditionally, meditation is a thing that you might even say an elite class of monks and nuns would engage in. Monks may engage in dedicated Dharma study, so the long tradition of Buddhist scholasticism in many Buddhist countries. Monks may engage in counseling, kind of help people deal with the difficulties of life. But monks also serve as a field of merit, right? Traditionally it's understood that your rebirth, if you're reborn in one of the heavens or one of the hells, or as a human or as a monk, on the path to awakening, this will happen due to good or bad karma, right? And the more merit you get, the more good karma you're developing, and then your lives will get better, right? And in some cases, just going to a temple, just being with a monk can benefit your karma. So it's understood that monks and nuns often serve as fields of merit, right? That they can purify the space around them. Monks may also perform funerals and various other rituals. Monks also often serve as pillars of the community. There's a biased critique that often regards monks as being detached and otherworldly, and that's simply not true. Monks have often been important figures within a community. So let's talk about what lay people do, right? Many Buddhists may engage in dana, or what we call generosity, right? So in some traditions, monks are not allowed to handle money. Monks are not allowed to do the kind of go out in the world and have jobs. They're full-time dedicated to the spiritual path. So for many lay people, the job of a lay Buddhist is to help make that possible. So maybe you volunteer time doing administrative work around a temple. Maybe you volunteer, maybe you donate food or robes to the monks at the temple. Maybe part of your dana is volunteering time, right? Is another very important one. Yeah. Some lay people may take vows. I vow to, not drink alcohol, or I vow to, abstain from meat, vegetarianism and so on, right? You may go before a monk or a nun and make this vow, and then for a period of time you will do that. In countries like Thailand, it's actually very common for young people to enter into the monastery for a period of time where they will receive the vows, right? And they'll live as a monk for a little while. And then when they're done, they'll give the vows back. Isn't that interesting? Then you go back to being, just an ordinary person, right? Many lay people also engage in, monks and nuns, as well as lay people, often engage in chanting, right? So you might chant a sutra or a mantra, chant the name of a Buddha. This is a very common practice, a form of mindfulness, might call it vocal mindfulness, you might say. Many lay people may also engage in Dharma study, right, to study the teachings in a dedicated fashion. And nowadays, meditation is becoming very popular as well. In the modern period, in places like Burma, Japan, and elsewhere, lay meditation movements developed, and that's really where what we now call mindfulness comes from. And again, vegetarianism is something that I know many Buddhists who happen to be vegetarian, but that's not necessarily required of lay Buddhists. If you make a vow to do that, then that's what you do. But traditionally, Buddhist monks would take whatever was given to them, right? And in many Buddhist countries, Tibet or Japan or elsewhere, Buddhists don't necessarily follow vegetarianism, although it is often encouraged. So, and that's what I have for today. So give kind of a rough overview of some of the basic teachings, life of the Buddha, some basic Buddhist teachings and ideas, and some of the things that Buddhists might get up to. So I've now concluded the formal presentation part of today. So I'd like to open up to any questions or comments or queries or other thoughts you may have.